Hello, and welcome to this second lesson on demography, the second of three, I think. Hopefully, I will have adjusted the work level in this lesson a little bit compared to last lesson to make it a bit more manageable. So again, we're looking at population trends. Last lesson we looked at birth and death rates and fertility rates. And in this lesson, we're going to look at life expectancy. So when we're talking about life expectancy, we're talking about the fact that it is increasing. If we go back to 1900, the average age of a male in the UK was 50, when the average expected life of a male was 50. These are all averages. Obviously, some people lived longer, some people didn't. And for a female, it was 57. By 2014, the life expectancy of a male had risen to 79 and a female to 82. People being born now have an average life expectancy of 92. And you can see life expectancy is going up. Also, we can see, and we discussed this last lesson, the projection is that these will converge. So males and females by 2030 will live the same amount, getting rid of the historical gap between males and females, largely caused by lifestyle and work. In or amongst all this, we've got increasing levels of people living till they're over 100, or centurions as we call them. Being a centurion used to be a relatively rare thing, hence why you would get a letter or telegram from the Queen saying, "Oh, well done, you got to 100." Actually, that's more and more common. We've got over 15,000 people in the UK now aged over 100. The Queen will shortly become one of them if she can avoid the coronavirus. It's a much more common thing, and by the end of this century, estimations are that 1 million people in the UK will be aged over 100. Obviously, we don't know how things like pandemics will pan out and what effect that will have on our aging population. It's worth noting here that the statistics are not as straightforward as they seem. When we talk about life expectancy of men being in their 80s, there is quite a lot of variation. So if you go down to the south of England, down to Dorset, the average age of a male is 83. No, the life expectancy of a male is 83. Whereas if you go up north to Blackpool or Manchester, in Blackpool, the life expectancy is 73, nearly 10 years lower. And that's for a number of reasons, some of which is down to diet, but a lot of it is down to social class. Basically, Dorset, Hampshire, Cambridgeshire, Rutland, which is near us, Surrey, all have more middle class people living in them, whereas Blackpool, Manchester, Salford, Liverpool all have more working class people living in them, and the middle classes live longer than the working classes. And we see the same pattern in females. The highest female life expectancy is all down south, Kensington and Chelsea and Richmond being in London, the rest being in the southeast. Down at the bottom here, we're seeing the north, Wales. Life expectancy isn't as straightforward as saying men live this long, females live this long. We also have to factor in things like social class and what effect that has. So we have an aging population. That means that the proportion of people in our population is getting older. 2007 was a bit of a watershed year. For that, in that year was the first time in our history that the number of people in this country aged over 65 outnumbered those number of people under the age of 16. And this creates quite an interesting population or demographic challenge. By 2032, there'll be a 61% increase in the number of people aged over 65. So if we look at these two population pyramids are the way we use to graphically show population change. In the center, you've got the ages there, you've got males on the left and females on the right, and then this is basically a bar chart. Well, it's actually a histogram on its side, showing you the percentage of the population, or in some cases in millions, that are of different ages. So you can see this is a traditional population pyramid. This is what the UK would have looked like 100 odd years ago, and it's quite common in developing countries where you've got lots and lots of your population who are very, very young, and then in each age group the numbers decrease because people die, and you see relatively few people aged over 80. Now if we look at a population pyramid of the UK from a couple of years ago, we're losing the pyramid. It's pretty much straight at the sides. Yes, of course there's a tapering off, but the tapering off doesn't happen until you're over 70, and we're beginning to see 100 plus being on population pyramids. And effectively what this means is you've got a large chunk of your population there aged over 60, which presents a demographic challenge. So you need to make some notes on the effect of an aging population. And again, I'd like you to pause the video at this point, use the text, and fill out the workbooklet if you've got it. If not, just make some notes on the effect of an aging population on things like public services. So we're talking about things like the National Health Service. Old people need healthcare much more, and we're acutely aware of this at the moment. Part of the reason why we're all stuck in our houses is to protect the NHS, because the NHS has got to protect old people. Old people are more vulnerable to this virus. We can't have the NHS overwhelmed with the number of old people, so we've got to stop the spread of the disease. One of the other factors, and this is quite an important one, is the dependency ratio. Now, the dependency ratio refers to the number of people in your population of working age compared to the number of people who aren't. Now, actually, that's the very young and the very old. But if we look at the ratio of workers to pensioners in this diagram down here, in 1990, there were 5.8, so nearly 6 people working for every pensioner, every old person who wasn't working. By the year 2000, that had dropped to 4, and in 5 years' time, they reckon it will be 2 working people supporting every single person who's not working. Now, this creates a massive challenge for our country in how on earth can we afford to have so few people working compared to those who aren't. That's what we mean by dependency. These are dependents. They are dependent on these people. These people pay their taxes, which pay for hospitals, schools, etc. We need the number of people below this to massively outnumber the people above, and we're not seeing that. And the final one that you need to talk about is the increase in one-person or pensioner households and what challenges that might bring. So make some notes on that, pause the video here, use the text, and then carry on. Okay, the next little bit is about how we perceive old people. So you want page 8 in the text and page 7 in your handouts. In modern society, old age was seen as a period of structured dependency. What we mean by that is the structure of our society, the way that we structure our society, makes old people dependent. We say when you're 60 or 65, you can retire. Enjoy the last few years of your life. Now, obviously, when these ideas were first brought in the early 20th century, we were expecting people at the age of 60 to die within 10 years. Now, they're living for 40 years after retirement. So we have created a society where these people are economically inactive. Now, from a Marxist perspective, they argue that this is down to capitalism, of course, because that's what Marxists argue about everyone. They argue that old people are literally useless to capitalism, so we just farm them out and wait for them to die. The state doesn't really care about them, doesn't really want to support them. They are economically useless and therefore useless to capitalism. And Marxists argue that age is an important part of role allocation. The young are preparing for their place in the workplace. You know all this from education. We are training you to become workers. Then you go into becoming productive members of a capitalist society, making money for the rich. And our life stages are all fixed around this idea of our ability to work. And our identities are very much built around this as well. And Marxists talk about the fact that old people struggle with identity because they are not productive. They are seen as society as being useless, which leads us to ageism, where we pity old people and we think, oh, look at them, useless. So Marxists argue very much ageism is built into the idea that we expect people to be productive. Postmodernists, on the other hand, disagree completely. And again, this is page 9 in the text, page 8 in the booklet. I'll give you a second in a minute to pause the video and make notes on both of these things. Pomos argue everything's changed. Age is no longer the be-all and end-all of identity. They argue that people now are actively aging, that more people are working, for instance, while they're old. Just go to B&Q, half the staff there seem to be old. And actually they argue in postmodern society our identity is defined by what we buy, not what we make. We've moved from identity being sourced in production to identity being sourced through consumption. If you think about this, from your own lives, it's not so much what we do, it's what we buy. A lot of people say what they want to say about themselves by their phone, by their clothes, by products that they buy. Our consumption of products defines who we are. And the elderly are, without a doubt, a massive consumer group. They've got disposable income and time to spend it. So they spend an awful lot of time on body maintenance, face creams and makeup to make themselves look younger. Old people are considerably more active than they used to be. Look at that old man who was doing laps of his garden for, he was 99. He was just about to hit 100. He is. He's not dead. He's not dead. Made Captain Tom. That was it. Anyway, I'm rambling. So Pomos argue age is not important anymore. Ageism is kind of a thing of the past. Age, like social class and gender, are no longer important things in how we define ourselves. So I'm going to let you pause the video here and make some notes. Use the booklet, use the prompts in there to make some notes. Now, when it comes to criticising postmodernism, the biggest criticism that we can level is the fact that they ignore an awful lot of things that modernists argue are still massively important to our society. For instance, social class. We talked about social class a little bit earlier. The middle classes live longer than the working classes, and they've got more money to enjoy their retirement. Gender as well. Women generally have less money than men because more of them work part-time. This affects their pensions. So this idea that old people are just like going out spending money and consuming, that will depend. Middle class people are doing that. But working class women who have no pensions because they may have chosen childcare over work, they don't have the money to actively age. At this point as well, if you look in the work booklet, there's a little thing about watching TV and how it depicts old people. I always think of Abe Simpson out of The Simpsons. The big running joke is he's deaf, he's senile, he does stupid things, he's a liability. This is the way in which we see old people in our society. Useless, kind of a source of entertainment for everyone else. Like, look, he thinks the iron is a phone. Duh. That kind of thing. So ageism is still alive and well, some people would argue. The last little bit to look at is age and social policy. Hirsch argues that we need to completely, radically change our social policy. That's like government laws and regulations to take into account of our aging population. Um, Most of our social policy was designed for a completely different time. So, for instance, people should be working longer. We should, and this has already started. They've increased the retirement age. They're removing the retirement age. There is no requirement now for people to retire. They can carry on working if they want to. The knock-on effect of that is the state aren't going to be able to afford to offer pensions to everybody. You know, so people will have to take out private pensions or carry on working into their 70s or 80s. Old people own a lot of houses, and the argument Hirsch makes is that we should be encouraging old people to move out of those houses, to trade down, to get to smaller houses, particularly the number of one-person households that are still living in 3 or 4 bedroomed houses. We can't, as a society, afford to have that happen because it increases the cost of housing, and you're probably all aware housing is a massive, massive issue, particularly for young people. They can't get hold of housing. Mortgages are expensive, and largely that is because there's an awful lot, about 12.5% of our population in terms of households are full of old people living on their own. So we need to change that, otherwise we're going to end up with a massive housing crisis. Well, we already have a massive housing crisis. And finally, the other thing to consider is the role that immigration plays in this. If you want to increase your dependency ratio, i.e. get more people of working age into your country, the easiest way to do that is to invite immigrants in, which is precisely what the UK has been doing for about the last 30 years, particularly with Eastern European workers, to get them in to work, to pay taxes, to pay for the old people. Now, of course, since Brexit, all of that has changed, and whilst it might be electorally popular to be like, ooh, boo, immigrants, actually, from a demographic point of view, immigration is needed because our dependency ratio is all wrong. And you've basically got 2 choices. You either encourage people to have more babies, which is difficult, or you increase immigration. So these are all social policy problems that we might have. Okay, so that's basically the nuts and bolts of what I need you to cover. It's all in the text. Complete the workbook, and I'll stick on a little quiz at the end so you can show what you have learned.